Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. I am fortunate enough in my life to be able to do what I love each day of my life, and a big part of that is the love I have for podcasting. And as such, I truly love and deeply enjoy all the episodes I get to do, and I have a blast connecting with new people. However, some episodes just touch my heart in ways that are extra special, and today's episode is an example of that. Today's guest on the show is a woman who I have been fortunate enough to support in the Cannabis Collective for the better part of the last 18 months. And to be fair, when she began the program, she was already doing absolutely incredible work with the cannabis plant. However, I have watched her tap into more and more of her power over that time and truly create something revolutionary within not only the cannabis space, but the Tantra space as well. She is a medicine worker who specializes in combining the medicine of cannabis with the medicine of Tantra. And in her work, she has transformed the lives of not only countless individuals, but also countless couples as well, bringing them into deeper union with themselves, and as such, anything and everything external to them as well. So please help me in welcoming my dear friend Zipporah, the High Priestess, Gongora, to the show. Zipporah, I am so excited that you are here with me today. You know, as I said in the intro, you and I have known each other for quite a while now. You got into the CCC right when it started, right around then. You've been with me for over a year now in there. And, you know, I've just been blown away at the unique magic you bring into the cannabis space. And we're going to get into all that stuff. But before I get into all that, right, before we get into all your juicy, amazing stuff that you do, Tantra, all these things we're going to talk about, I want to first figure out, you know, usually on this podcast, because it's a psychedelic podcast, I'll start out by asking how you first got interested in psychedelics. But knowing your background is very similar to mine, where we're very intimately tied with the cannabis plant, I want to change up that question a little bit and throw my listeners off, right? Got to keep them guessing, and ask you how you first got interested in cannabis. How did that first open up for you? Was this something that you were open to from a young age? Was it something you were closed off to? And how did you bridge that gap over time?
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. So when I first picked it up, I was 15 in high school, and my boyfriend at the time passed me the blunt. And honestly, I didn't understand the hype about it. I wasn't into it. I think I would only accept it because it was a social thing and it was around me. So then, yeah, I would just use it sporadically. It wasn't something that I used daily or anything like that. And then as time went by, should I just go right into it?
Yeah, right into it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So as time went by, a couple years went by, and I was smoking, and I'm going to say weed because back then for me, it was just weed. And I never use that term now, never. But yeah, so we were smoking. I grew up in Philly. I was born in Long Island, New York. And at the time I was, it was like the dead of winter, and we were just watching, I think, Fresh Prince. Go figure.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I was with my coworker and his Jamaican roommate, and they were just bragging about how this Jamaican shit was really strong. And I was just like, whatever. And so we're smoking, watching TV. And then all of a sudden my friend, he could feel that something was wrong because I think my breathing changed, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was just like, I don't think so. And then my heart started palpitating, and I knew something was off. My body was sending the alarm systems. And so because it was winter, I thought maybe it would be a good idea to go outside and go into the cold. But before that, I was just like, I can't breathe. And then the Jamaican was like, "Quick, get her Kool-Aid." And then they ran and got me Kool-Aid. He was like, "Add a bunch of sugar." They added a bunch of sugar in it. I'm trying to drink it, but I can't because in my mind, my throat is closing up. And so I try to get the juice down, but it's like that. And so I just I spilled the juice. I went outside into the cold, and then my knees just gave out, and I fell to the floor. And at that instant, I started thinking, holy fuck, I'm gonna die from marijuana and my parents are gonna find out. Like, I was feeling the worst shame. And that's one of the lowest frequencies. And to go out like that, that's not a way to die. and so luckily I woke up after I fainted, but then I woke up and my friend's hand was right above my face because I think they were trying to see if I was breathing before they gave me CPR. And then at that point, I put my hands up and I'm trying to breathe and relax. And then I just started like hysterically laughing because I was like, what the fuck just happened? And my friends are shocked. At that point, that's when my heart started racing again. I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to mess with my life. Rush me to the ER. And so I stayed in the ER from like 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then I went to work right after that. And so they gave me the urine test and they knew that there was marijuana in my system. And so the doctor was just like, don't do drugs. They were probably laced and this and that. And I didn't want to believe that. And they were also telling me maybe it was the smoke where I developed like this allergic reaction. I was like, why being allergic to weed? I don't know. And so I have a problem listening to authority and even doctors. Yeah. Yeah. And then with my stubbornness, like I decided to put it in brownies and to make edibles. And I didn't know at the time that that's even more potent than smoking it. And so that was my second ER trip. And luckily I had really good insurance under my dad at the time. And so, so I went 15 years without touching it. In retrospect, I had suffered a very extreme trauma right in that same year. I was 19 when this happened. I didn't mention that. But in that same year, I had something really significant happened that I didn't look at it as trauma, but it was. And I didn't release it out of my body or talk to a therapist about it. And so I kept it in. And so what happened was when I went to go smoke the plant, it just triggered into a panic attack. But I had never experienced anxiety before or panic attacks. So I associated it with death, like with a peanut allergy. And so for me, it was fatal. I was like, I think cannabis is now fatal to me. And so I just kind of had to like chalk it up to an allergy that my body developed. And so I didn't touch it for 15 years because of that reason.
Wow. That is wild.
I don't want to scare people with it, but I know now it's because of the trauma that I had in my body. And that can literally happen with anything and not just with cannabis. Anything that's potent enough will manifest that in your body in a scary way.
Oh yeah. It's happened with me. It's happened with cannabis before. It's so funny. I've never heard anyone that had a similar story to me. The throat closing up thing didn't happen on cannabis. It happened on mushrooms for me. And that was a panic attack that was quite extreme, but it did lead to the best ego death, if you want to call it that, ever. And that totally changed my life after that because it forced me to surrender in a way that I didn't even think was possible. But with cannabis, on the other hand, one of the main ways this happened to me was the first time I ever actually got high. Like, because you might try cannabis a couple times and you're like, I don't really know if I felt anything. And then there's one time you're like, well, that was different. Something happened there, And it was when I was about 15, right around there. And I went to a friend's house whose dad was a state trooper in Massachusetts. And so for some reason, that was the safe spot to smoke, At least it's that cough, But my buddy Danny had taken a lightsaber and taken all the ones that you throw like this and it comes out in a big long tube type thing. He had taken all the tubes except the first one out, drilled a hole in it and made a steamroller out of it. So he would call it going to the dark side. He'd light it up red and then we'd smoke weed out of it. So we were underneath this porch and I had been drinking, not a whole lot. I probably had like 3 or 4 beers or something. And I was like, oh, I'm impervious to cannabis. Like I've tried it a couple times. It doesn't even affect me. So I just ripped this steamroller and I go walking back inside, to the basement. And there's a bunch of people in there and I think everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, without any awareness, I just come to on a couch in the middle of a conversation with someone. And I'm like, whoa, like I don't even know how I got here. And so the rest of the night I was a little nervous, trying to keep my hands clapping or something, like pay attention to something, make sure I don't black out again. But that caused a lot of anxiety, a whole lot of anxiety when that happened. And I think that, just like you were saying, this trauma that lives inside of us, this is what cannabis does. Like, that's actually, like, now we understand, like, oh, that's great when that happens, right? You want to have the right set and setting, of course. You want to understand and be educated that this can happen. But I think that's where a lot of people, like, they kind of like laugh at cannabis, like, oh, cannabis, like, it's not going to do anything. But it's like, no, it will definitely do something, especially if you take enough of it. And, again, like, especially back in the day, too, when you were getting mids or kind bud and then you find Jamaican stuff. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. Really cool. But it is amazing, too, because, when I had an instance with caffeine like that, and this is like to go on your theory of like anything can cause this, right? Is when I was 19, I was dating a woman who, it was very toxic. So I was 19 as well. Actually, I didn't realize that until I just said it out there. But I was, I was a Dunkin' Donuts type guy, grew up in Boston, right? So, I was getting a lot of Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee. And it was my routine every day. I'd get one in the morning and one in the mid-afternoon. And I was dating this girl, and every day she would show up and be like, buy me beer. And I'd be like, no. And then I would fall under her spell, and I would buy her beer, and then we'd argue for hours, basically. It was a very toxic, weird thing I look back on with such like confusion. But anyway, I had been getting really worked up for days on end. And so I end up getting a coffee one day. I'm chilling on my parents' couch, and I go to start drinking this coffee, and my heart starts palpitating. And it never stopped. Like, it literally was like, it felt like my heart was getting sucked into my chest, like, just constantly. So I had to go get a heart monitor put on me. And it ends up just being anxiety. But I avoided caffeine for 10 plus years because of that. Like, I was petrified. But it wasn't the caffeine. I just didn't understand. I had trauma around my mom's recent cancer diagnosis that she had sworn to me she was going to quit smoking, and then she wasn't. But at 19, I didn't think that shit was affecting me. But it's amazing how that stuff can come out. It will come out for sure.
Yeah, it came out with me for coffee too. And the same thing with the heart. And so much that I was thinking, it didn't get as bad as my cannabis episode, but it did. I started thinking, well, maybe is this like a psychic intuition that something is wrong? So I called my mom and I was like, is everything okay at home? And she was like, yeah, everything's fine. I'm like, I don't know, something's wrong. No one taught me about anxiety.
Yeah.
Not even at home.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to breathe. I was breathing shallowly. And so, yeah, now we have all the modalities and the training to know about these things on how to relax yourself and just breathe into it. And usually, like you said, I think you said the cannabis, that was like your most profound trip, is because literally you faced your fear.
Yes.
And you broke through. And on the other side was magic, because here we are.
Yes, 100%. And, I kind of think of us like, for anyone listening, like any of you that were into psychedelics 10, 20 years ago, before they had all this education out and things like that, we're kind of like the first explorers in a way. We're not, the 60s were, but again, like, we were taking big doses and not really knowing what the hell we were messing with. And so these days, right, kids that are getting into it, I saw something about cannabis about this, like, kids these days have no idea how challenging it was to buy a bag of flour off someone you never met, go into the woods, try to smoke, and come back not smelling like it, because now they have vape cartridges and things like that. But it goes, with everything, right? Like, at the end of the day, we field tested a lot of this stuff, and now we can educate from our experience of saying, hey, like, before you connect with cannabis, you may want to ask yourself, do you have trauma? If you've never connected with it, you probably shouldn't do it your first time at a gigantic concert with 50,000 people there, right? Things that are obvious to us now, but back then were not so obvious, So it's amazing to see how this stuff has propelled you forward in your life and allowed you to educate people on the topic of cannabis and breath and everything else you do too, based on the experiences you had where you weren't educated in what happened in that state. It's very important that we educate ourselves around these things.
What is up, family? I wanted to take a second while you're tuning in to tell you about an amazing new product I recently began using. Now, you guys know I do ads very rarely, and my promise to you is that anything I speak about is something I personally have found value in using regularly. Well, recently, I came across a company called Brain Supreme, who sells microdoses of mushrooms mixed with adaptogens, nootropics, and other additions as well. And even though I've microdosed off and on for years, I have never felt results like these. In only 2 weeks, I'm sleeping better, I have far less mind chatter, my ability to perform has exponentially improved, and best of all, the sense of inner peace I've been feeling is like nothing I've ever experienced in microdosing before. Right now, you can get 15% off of any of their products when you use code SPRAGUE15 at checkout. And to find out more about them and grab some for yourself, head down to the show notes for this episode and begin your journey into microdosing today. Now back to the show.
Yeah. And, in that 15 years, I started going slowly into my spiritual journey, but then I would say it catapulted when I moved from San Francisco to Colombia. And I moved abroad and I really went deep into the ancestral and sacred medicines. And that's when I really started learning about Wim Hof method and meditation and controlling my heart rate. And so during the pandemic, and I'm going to finish out my cannabis story with the psychedelics and how I picked it up again. So it was the pandemic and Medellin was way too locked down. Like I wasn't even allowed to bring guests into my condo. Like I had to, I couldn't. So I was like, fuck this. And so I went back to California and I was dating. And I was dating somebody that
Pandemic was a good time for that. You really had time for nothing else,
Yeah, I wasn't gonna be all alone. What? And so I was dating somebody that was in the medical device industry. And so he had offered me this. And California, they're so open. They got their beautiful dispensaries. And I had spent 5 years in California and not smoking because I had this allergy. And so I never got to see I never got to enjoy the beauty of these luxurious dispensaries that they had over there. And so he had offered me these like little gourmet cannabis not gummies, like they were like mints. And I looked at him and I was just like, okay, I got to tell you about my marijuana trauma. And I was like, after I told him the story, I was like, do you know CPR? Because you work in the hospital system. He was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, you know what? I think I'm ready to try this again.
That's sad.
And
Laura.
Yeah. Because it's like,
All right, we'll do it.
What?
I said, can you bring me back if I die? All right, cool. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Unit energy.
Yeah. And so I started taking them little by little, and I would notice that there was like the skip in my heartbeat, and I'm like, okay, all right, just take a deep breath in through your nose, getting oxygen up to your brain. Okay, we're good. I'm not going to get brain damage. I'm still getting oxygen. We're good. And so I would calm myself down and do the deep breathing slowly. And then, I would start experimenting with it on my own. And then I noticed that there was like this invisible line that I passed. If I took a little bit too much, then I had to go lay down and put on some music, close my eyes, and go. And it took me on these DMT like journeys, and I'm like, holy shit, what is this? And then I would ask my friends, I'm like, are you experiencing this? Like, there's just like these trippy states where it just feels like you're going into DMT, like an ayahuasca ceremony. And they'd be like, no, what are you talking about? And so whatever. I started experimenting with it on my own. I was doing it on Sundays. I was taking myself to church, meeting with God. And then I started communicating with my ancestors. And then they were showing me different chapters of my life and making sense out of like why I had to leave here and go here, and then why I was sent this way. Things were just falling into place, and I started understanding things from a higher perspective that didn't make sense to me at the moment, obviously. At the time, I was leading a women's circle. I was living in Playa del Carmen at this time. I was redirected, let's say, to Mexico. And it's in Mexico because it's in the Riviera Maya, ancient Mayan lands, very magical, I'm telling you. And it's out there that, I was working with this women's group, but I didn't know that was training for me to hold space for co-ed ceremonies. And so I had experimented over and over again with the medicine. And then I brought my friends into it, and I was like, yo, you down to do a cannabis ceremony? And he was like, I smoke weed every day. Sure, why not? And this is a psychedelic buddy. Like him and I would go to like peyote ceremonies, and he was into that. So I knew it would be a safe person to do it with, him and somebody else. And man, my buddy, and he's like this big buff dude, he was on the floor crying, releasing all this emotion. And so it was in that ceremony that I could see my future. I literally, like, my third eye was like, psh, and literally what I saw in that vision happened 3 months later. And so that's why I'm so confident in telling people the intuition that you get access to with this divine plan is unbelievable. Believe it. Believe it, because that's something that most people discredit. When we're smoking, people just say, they wave it off and they're like, oh, I was just high. I was just thinking out of the box, but it was because I was high.
Yeah.
And then they don't use that as part of their integration.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of like how I started.
It's really funny you mentioned that, because for me, where kind of how this all started, I don't think I've ever told this full story on the show before. I'll make it quick. But when I was a teenager connecting with cannabis, after I had that blackout experience, I just thought I was very sensitive to cannabis. That was like my original belief. Like, oh, I must be more sensitive. My friends all thought it was hilarious at the end of a party. I was always like the straight edge kind of guy, right? And didn't like drinking, didn't use any tobacco, didn't like cannabis, was still like, no, say no to drugs. And so when I started to be open to it, after a couple experiences I had done, my friends thought it was funny to invite me out to the circle and like give me a hit of like mids. And I would just go back into my parents' house and watch Star Wars and just journey for hours and just like random thought patterns and whatnot. So fast forward, now to 2020, I had been having wild experiences with cannabis my whole life, but I didn't really ever know if it was just me. I'm just sensitive to cannabis, like this doesn't work for everyone. And then actually it was Danny Rios, who we were talking about before we hit record, who when I first met him and he tried my cannabis, he was like, dude, there's something very different here. And I was like, oh, like, I don't know, it's organic. I don't know, maybe that's it. And he's like, no, like, have you ever hosted a cannabis ceremony? Could you bring me through one? And so in the moment I was like, yeah, sure. So I formulated what now is the Blistening module. You went through it, but basically it was like, all right, let me pick 4 songs that I think evoke a certain emotion, and let me lay a bunch of people down, get them high as absolute hell, and then play these 4 songs and see if like what their results are. That was like my first, ceremonial structure. And I remember the first one I ever did, one of my buddies, Ben Joy, who was like a very, unit type guy, been in the coaching space for a while. He had a full on breakdown release crying for like an hour. And he had this vision of his parents passing away and like him burying them. And like, so it was this like very moving thing. And he ended up calling them after and things like that. But like after that, he was like, dude, I've never experienced anything like that. And here I am, like imposter syndrome. Like, what did I do? I wasn't responsible for that. I have no idea. So then people kept telling me like, oh, I heard about that ceremony. Can you host one for me? And I'm like, okay. But the whole time I was like, I don't know why people are asking me to do this. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. But it just kept working over time. And so it's very similar, right? Like you just start seeing these things happen and occur, and they always happen for me. But I just kept thinking it must be just, oh, my endocannabinoid system is different or something like that. Because I worked at the dispensary for years where people could come in, smoke joints, drive cars, do all this stuff that for me was always kind of hard to do. Like, you know what I mean? Like my friends would always want to do blunt cruises when I was younger. And I was like, hell no. Like I'm paranoid as fuck to get in a car when I'm, high. And so like, it always just made sense to me like, oh, I guess my system's just wired differently. But in hearing other stories like yours, it's like, oh, this makes so much sense now that we were just, for whatever reason, open to something with cannabis that maybe other people weren't, or maybe aren't able to, maybe it's not their plant, whatever. But at the end of the day, it really works that way. And now I have friends that I never thought would be open to the idea of cannabis being a plant medicine, being a psychedelic, that are like, dude, like, okay, yeah, I succumbed. I watched one of your videos and I tried something out and dude, it worked. And I'm like, holy shit, this is like really crazy. So it's just insane to see how this movement is growing and how conscious cannabis and cannabis as a whole is starting to be, revered for what it truly is. It's not just about getting high and Cheech and Chong, like, yeah, that's cool, whatever. But it's a yes and the and is much bigger than the yes, like for real. It's amazing.
Yeah. And for me, after not touching it for so long, it was like I was approaching it with this purity, and I think that was part of my life's mission, is to go through that traumatic episode because I needed to heal. And I didn't have the healing modalities at my disposal like we do now. we needed to go through that turmoil so we can show people the way out and not completely just throw it away as something they'll never do again, ever pick up in their life. And I mean, it's gone deeper, like with experimenting it with it in a spiritual way. And, you know, like when all of this started happening for me and I started seeing like that others, you know, were able to go into the journey with us, like we could bring them into that portal. I started researching it because I was like, well, what? Well, I already knew that the Brazilian religious, well, they're more a spiritual community. I guess you could call it a religious organization, Santo Daime. Like I knew that they were using ayahuasca and Santa Maria as part of their sacrament. So I was like, wait a minute, what do they know that we don't? And so I started looking it up online, and then I started Santa Maria, Santo Daime. Go into the images, you'll see the Divine Mother, like filled with cannabis leaves. And I'm like, and that for me was my big moment. Holy shit, it's the essence of the divine feminine that we're smoking in, of love, compassion, forgiveness, intuition, and unfortunately or fortunately, many of us can rely on it a little bit too much, that cradling motherly energy, and use her to just drown out all of our worries and our to-dos and our issues and our trauma. But it's just temporarily. But it's like, you know, some people, you know, a lot of people can't get out of that, where they, you know,
they end up getting addicted. They end up getting dependent. They end up, you know, blaming the plant for these things, right? Like that's the wild thing that, you know, looking back in hindsight now was insane when I worked at the dispensary, is how many people on both sides, whether good or bad, blamed cannabis. Like, oh, cannabis is what makes me happy, or cannabis is what makes me anxious, or cannabis is what makes me lazy. Any of these kind of like things where you're blaming the plant, it's externalizing your power. And what I've learned from the plant, and I guarantee you've, you know, felt a very similar thing or experienced it, is that this plant doesn't want to be to blame for either of the things. It wants you to take accountability, just like a mom, right? A mom doesn't want, you know, for people to say, wow, you're such a great son because you had a great mother, right? Like a mother wants to see you go forth and prosper. She doesn't want you to hang in her basement her whole life. You know what I mean? Like, like even if she really wants to be with you, she doesn't really want you to hang out in your basement all day, you know? But again, she may let you because she loves you, you know? And so that's
right, unconditionally.
Exactly. And so I tell everyone, like, you know, cannabis to me is a little bit more, I don't want to call it aware, because obviously every plant medicine is very aware, but she's more open to not revealing her full self to you right off the bat. Whereas like mushrooms, for instance, good luck not being ready for those. They're going to show you what they are regardless of how ready you are. Whereas cannabis can be this plant for people for many years. It's just like, I get high, I numb out, I watch Netflix. And then if all of a sudden they start saying, hey, I actually want to use intention. What if I do breathwork with this? Boom, you get a totally different experience, because the plant's like, well, hey, you're showing me now you're ready for the next level. So I'm willing to open that up to you. There can be experiences like we both experienced where the plant kind of shows itself to you because you maybe took too much or whatever. But again, it's a very safe plant to work with so long as people understand how to titrate the dose. You know, as long as you understand how to titrate the dose, you're not really going to get yourself in any too hot water. If you understand set and setting, if you're not driving with it or doing anything dumb with it, you know. But at the end of the day, like I always tell people, and I know you're right on this too, you talk about it too. It's like, guys, we can say that people become dependent or addicted to cannabis, but don't blame cannabis for that. Cannabis should not be the one getting bastardized as a result of human beings not being aware enough of their own trauma and whatnot. And, you know, that may sound harsh, but at the same time, like, look at how much this plant has been bastardized. Look at how much, even right now that it's being legalized, you know, they're making all these synthetic forms of it and all this crazy shit. When in reality, all cannabis is really here to do, in my opinion, is to reveal us to ourselves when we forget, and then allow us to go back out there remembering who we are and bring our divinity and magic to the world so we can light up other people and awake the world, you know? And so it's amazing to have these conversations because, yeah, like this whole idea of blaming the cannabis plant for either the good things or the bad things is just silly, because that's an externalization of power, and you can't have empowerment while you're disempowering yourself. It just can't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this has, like, the prohibition of marijuana I truly believe it's also because they knew how powerful the plant was.
Definitely.
And yeah, because it was connecting us to our sovereignty and to our power and to our intuition, something that they've been numbing in us with our foods and with everything, like the fluoride and the content that we watch. And it's come to the point where now this is like exoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
That we have our mystery schools of teaching people how to access the divine. It's another pathway to source. It can be. I've had so many people that have experienced Kundalini awakenings through, well, with the plan and also, teaching Tantra, but still, these godly experiences, all plant medicines really can get you there, if you're ready. Yeah. I also think people are not ready for this knowledge too. They're just not prepared for it, or maybe that it can't go into the wrong hands either. Yeah. So if they have malicious intent into it, or they're just traumatized and unhealed, but
at the end of the day, why I love cannabis, and I also love other plant medicine, but why I love cannabis is that if we think about what you just said, right, that we can imagine that the powers that shouldn't be, right, the people that really run the world here, they started to understand what things would allow us to be programmed. And they understood that at the level where they made it illegal in the 30s, they didn't have all the propaganda to go along with it. So they had to make it illegal because if people were connecting with it at that time, they hadn't done enough programming yet to pull people out of the nuclear family, to distract them in Netflix. So they had to just create reefer madness, right? And say it's bad, you're going to rot your brain, just fear, 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 right? Nowadays, they're actually starting to legalize it. And the question I have is why? Because what I know it's not is that the government cares about your health, right? So even if they don't understand the spiritual implications of like waking up or whatever, they do understand the fact that cannabis can help with glaucoma, Crohn's disease, cure cancer, all of these things that now you can go to PubMed and actually find certified studies for. For anyone who's listening who's like, I've never heard cannabis can cure cancer. Look up Phoenix Tears, Rick Simpson's organization. It's fucking phenomenal. But again, like at the end of the day, what's so beautiful about cannabis is that even though all these psychedelics are getting a lot of popularity right now, think about the general populace, right? Like you and I are talking about a very high level type individual. You guys listening are fit in that bill too. We've probably been in the spirituality for a while. We've been drinking spring water, eating organic food, doing breath work, fasting, all these things. And so for us to go do ayahuasca or something, it's like, okay, maybe that makes sense, right? But think about the populace, right? Like if we want the mainstream to be able to heal quickly and quantum leap their development, it's not going to be ayahuasca or mushrooms because that's too far of a gap to bridge, right? Those things haven't been in our, entertainment industry and whatnot for a while. Like, yeah, you get the occasional mention of mushrooms or something, but cannabis is in Cheech and Chong. It's in all these things, right? So people already assume now it's some dumb thing, right? It's like, cannabis, whatever. So that's the perfect energy for someone to go into an experience with and have a powerful experience that then has them go, whoa, if I just do that with cannabis, which first of all, they can do if they don't have a lot of money or can't fly to the jungle or whatever. But if that happened with cannabis, what will mushrooms do? What will ayahuasca do? So I think it bridges a gap for a lot of people that can wake people up very quickly. So yeah, I 100% agree.
And it's so accessible. It's one of the most introductory plant medicines on earth.
Yes, 100%.
And all we need is our breath and a safe space and a guide.
Yeah. And even though you can have that rapid heartbeat thing, which still happens to me. Like I still, when I connect with cannabis, I have that skip and beat thing. It happens, and I've just grown accustomed to it. I'll notice when my awareness gets taken down there, and I'll notice the beliefs pop up, and I really think that once again, if we think everything, if we theorize that everything in life is helping us or looking to help us, then what does that skip heartbeat do for me? It brings up limiting beliefs around, do I really feel like I'm healthy? I watched my parents age not so gracefully because they didn't take care of themselves. So where is that trauma still in me of witnessing that happen? And how can I then heal it every single time that comes up to repeat myself? No, I'm healthy. I'm totally fine. My heart is insanely healthy, So I'm glad you brought that up. But even though it has those things, it's extremely safe. No one has ever died from cannabis.
Yeah. And recently in LA, I went to a cannabis ceremony that was a cannabis and Archangel Michael ceremony. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Yeah. And so we were smoking out of volcanoes. I know you use the volcano.
Yeah.
That was actually my first time trying it.
Wow.
And so I did the volcano, and then I also did a joint that was being offered, and it was very potent. And so I did both. Well, I went through what you went through, a challenging time, and and that's not the first time, but when that happens to me, I'm like, all right, Zipporah, this is your moment to fucking show, like, practice what you preach.
Yeah.
Like, get yourself out of this. And like, for me, it's training.
Yes.
Like, let me return back to the moment where I feel like I'm like panicking. I'm not going to call for help because I know how to get myself out of this. And so, yeah, every now and then the medicine will take me through those periods of, I'm not going to say darkness either, but just challenging, where it's like, okay, the panic alerts are about to take off, but let me bring myself back down.
Yeah, no, 100%. I totally see it. Like, I think a lot of people, I imagine anyway, because I have people reach out to me and they're like, dude, how did you get through the challenging experiences of cannabis? I'm like, what makes you think I've worked my way through all of them? Like, I still have them very often. It's just that now I realize I took a medicine, the medicine is working. I realize that I am safe. And I also now think, what is this teaching me? And so those like pattern interrupts, if you want to call them that, or, reimagining of stories I once had or whatever, now allow me to capitulate it the same way you said, right? This is just another ice bath. That's what I always say for any challenge that pops up. It's like, I've done an ice bath in January. I can do this, like there's nothing I'm going to ever experience. I don't think anyway, it's more uncomfortable than doing a fucking cold plunge in January in Boston. So now that I've done that, I'm like, well, it's just another ice bath, just different form, but same thing, and I think like, my buddy Jason and I showed this guy, I met him at Arcadia, Aubrey's Festival. He's now one of my best buddies. I've only known him a year, but like literally just immediate soul connection. And I showed him breath work on MDMA, and it changed his life. Like literally, like he's never been the same person since, in a very positive way. And so that night, I have all these little catchphrases I'll say all the time, like game, recognize game, things like that. So I don't even notice when I throw them out, but I had one like,
you're like the dictionary of it. You need to write a book.
So silly, like they're kind of like all these responses I have because, there is anxiety in me. So like if people are talking and I have that moment of like, I'm stumbling on my words, I just call them one of those sayings. And usually it fills in enough of a gap where I can regain my thought pattern and then keep going. So it's like a strategy I've developed. I actually analyzed this recently on a psychedelic experience. I was like, where does that come from? But one of them I say is like, this is why we train. And so he just took a liking to that. And so now every single time he's talking about a challenge, he's like, brother, this is why we train, And so I always remember that. So it's funny you brought that up.
Yeah.
Really cool. So I'm curious, Zipporah, one thing that I would love to bring into this, we're talking about modalities and tools that we utilize with cannabis that have allowed us to connect deeper with cannabis. And I got to say for everyone listening, I've been a part of a lot of cannabis ceremonies. I do a lot of them myself. We do breathe with cannabis, all this stuff. And I love what we do. It's really fun. But I had Zipporah come through as a guest presenter, right, in the CCC, and she did her high Tantra ceremony. Holy shit, guys. It was the fucking coolest thing I've ever experienced. And so I want to ask you, how did you first find Tantra? And did you blend cannabis with it right off the bat? Was that something that came to you right off the bat? Or how did these two worlds merge? Because I got to tell you, I can't imagine Tantra ever existing without cannabis now, or even cannabis existing without Tantra. Rach and I do a bunch of it. It's amazing. And I got to credit you for bringing me into that world. So how did that all happen for you?
Yeah. So when I was in San Francisco, California, I was, I would say 2017, I was dating somebody who after some time, when we became intimate, he decided to get vulnerable with me and let me know that he was suffering from erectile dysfunction due to medication back when he was right before he turned 20. And he was still struggling with it until his mid 30s when I had met him. And this is a biohacker. He's actually the one who got me into Wim Hof, like meditation. He had that the brain scanner thing that can track how good you meditate. I ended up getting it because it's amazing because like you can literally see with the app as soon as you start thinking thoughts, then the landscape, like if you choose the Amazon jungle or like the rainforest, it starts raining and thunderstorming when you're thinking thoughts. Amazing these gadgets that are out there.
I've seen that at biohacking conferences. Josh Trent had one on when I forget the name of it. There's a
Muse?
name for it, but what was it?
Muse?
Muse? That could be it, actually. That could be it. Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Whatever it was sick. Continue.
Yeah. And so like he had done all these things. He even joined this cult called One Taste. Have you heard of it?
I have not heard of that one. I've been in my old cult thing for a little while back a couple of years ago, but yeah, I've heard of that one.
No, but it's teaching men how to stimulate. Well, no, how to do these yoni meditations. Yoni Sanskrit for vagina, but how to do these meditations and like. That is not helping with his erectile dysfunction. So, like, they were just like, huh?
It's probably making him more nervous, thinking about yonis when he's trying to, perform,
Well, yeah, I guess I could see how they try to pitch it to him, if you get turned on, but it's more of a meditation. It's actually pretty tantric, but no, so he had tried so many things and it didn't work. And so he had asked me out. He was like, listen, do you think that we could explore Tantra together? It's this, this beautiful philosophy about sexuality and doing different practices. And I liked him enough where I was like, yeah, I'll look into this, because the whole point of the conversation was he was using medical intervention to get a boner. And so he was injecting his penis with testosterone. And so that was like, he had taken Viagra, Cialis in the past. And for him to do this testosterone, it was actually like the lesser evils for him, because, they all come with their side effects, and it's really bad. Like if you have, so with the testosterone injections, it works really well. But then like afterwards, he would go take a cold shower, and usually that did the trick and it would go down. But if it didn't, he would go into his weight room and lift weights to get it to go, his erection to go down. And so there was one time it didn't work. And so he had to rush. He had to go to the hospital, because you could lose your member if you stay with the blood flow in there for hours. So it's super dangerous and risky, these medicines. And so, so we looked into Tantra, and I just started looking for different tantric rituals and exercises that we could do together. And I started realizing like, this is like a mix of meditation, of light breath work, of presence, very practical tools. And so I would bring them into the bedroom, into our intimacy practice. And over time, like, okay, so on one day I would do it, and then he would do it on another day. So he took the initiative. So it wasn't always just on me. And I think that's the best thing with anything, especially in a relationship, because then you don't want to be stuck being the teacher all the time.
Yeah, 100%.
That's especially for me as a Tantra teacher, I don't want that. Like if you're really interested in up-leveling our sex game, then. And so what ended up happening over a couple months is that the sex was astonishing. Like I remember telling my best friend at the time, because I was moving to Colombia and I did let him know that. And so we were together for a year in this lovership, but with the intention of leaving. And so I was telling her, I don't know how I'm ever going to go back to having basic vanilla sex after this, because this shit is on a whole different level. And it's not like I was getting instruction on how to have sex. No, it was the tantric practices that were leading up to it. And they were just, I realized, holy fuck, that's just the foreplay. Tantra, it becomes the foreplay, because we're getting out of our minds that are always racing, the monkey mind, just focused on work or the future or the past, dwelling on all this bullshit. But then when we're together, we can give each other full presence. And for me, quality time is my number one love language. And so it's hitting that, and physical touch is my secondary. And so it's hitting on both of those things. And so and then over a couple months, guess what? We wean him off of taking the medication.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. And that's when I realized, like, fudge, Tantra is the medicine. It is the cure for these type of sexual dysfunctions. for all different types. And so after that, I moved to Colombia and I started noticing that I kept attracting a lot of partners that had different forms of erectile dysfunction or impotence or pre-ejaculation, so many different things. And even talking to women, inorgasmic, all this stuff. And I realized like all these issues are universal. Like so many people experience it, but they don't go to their doctor about it, or they're ashamed, or what have you. And, or they just kind of accept it. A lot of people accept it, or a lot of people will turn to medical intervention.
Yeah. I mean, it's so, first of all, everything you said is amazing. And I second that Tantra is a level up for sure. When Rachel and I started doing it, I came into it with a belief, I'm an Aries, so I have a lot of fire in me and I like intensity. And so like, when Rachel was like, we're going to be soft and sensual, I was like, boring. This is boring. And then when I kind of know, I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. And I found the same thing, that really what I see Tantra doing so well is that it's creating ultimate presence and connection with yourself, and then therefore anyone that you're connecting with. And I think that, again, if you talked about 2,000 years ago, that would have been like, yeah, presence. Like everyone's got that. But in today's world, people are so fucking distracted. And especially with men, I'm glad you brought this up because it's a gigantic issue for men. Like Paul Chek talks about all the time, that he has these 18-year-old high school athletes reach out to him and are like, hey, we can't get off Viagra. And he's like, why at 18 do you need Viagra? Like the wind should blow and you should get a boner, right? So at the end of the day, there's like this systemic thing happening. It's many different multifacets, of course. Like one of the things is the fabrics we're wearing. Polyester is really good at killing testosterone. Lack of sunlight, poor sleep patterns, blue light at night, terrible food, glyphosate, all these things that are in our food supply, water supply, etc., showering in tap water, all these things are contributing to this issue. And so at the end of the day, if we don't want to have people on medications, because again, like you're saying, like these things can be extremely damaging. Like, for any guy listening right now, imagine losing your dick. Like, imagine that. That would be a really rough day. All right.
For all of us.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want that.
Yeah. Like we play a big role in society, on both sides, And so like at the end of the day, our ability to be able to find natural cures to these things is amazing. Now, if it just fixed that would be incredible and earth-shattering on its own, right? But also, it's bringing us closer to ourselves. It's connecting us deeper with our intimate partners. Like, there's so many other things that are so beautiful about Tantra, too. And then when you throw cannabis into it, mind blown.
Right. Because now you're just up-leveling your intimacy into the world of spirituality and sexuality. And they don't teach us this. This is very esoteric stuff that they've been doing since our ancestors. They had the mystery schools where they had these sex temples and the tantric priestesses and priests. They were educating people on how to have divine, sacred sexuality and go into a sacred union with one another and find your soulmate and live with so much joy. But now they've, suppressed that. They demonize sexuality. The Catholic Church, with religion and telling us that, it's harmful, it's dangerous, it's sinful, even to touch our own body, our own temple. Because that is when two people can get together like soulmates and have, the sacred union through intercourse. There's people that can have a whole psychedelic experience and commune with God. So it is a form of reaching divinity. It's a whole pathway. And so that's another reason why it's been damned. And I think that's also part of the agenda with destroying sacred union through hypersexuality, with rap, with the music, with making everything so getting us into the whole casual sex culture that we have today. Right?
So
with these fleeting encounters. I was sucked into that, thinking that it was more female empowerment, but really I was just losing myself. I was giving my power away to people that didn't deserve it. And I wasn't manifesting shit. When two soulmates get together and they have this sacred union and this tantric sex, I guess you could say, you can manifest a lot quicker all of your desires, right? Isn't it magical with you and your partner?
It is so magical, and again, like, it's so interesting too. And I'm glad we're talking about this because this is something I get hit up by a lot of men about, because they're like, oh, like, is casual sex bad? I'm like, I'm not going to tell you anything's bad, but, there's like, Rachel calls it junk food sex, that's kind of what casual sex is. Like, maybe it feels good in the moment. Oftentimes it's just awkward and weird, but maybe it feels good, but it's like junk food, it feels good going down, but not coming out. So yeah, like, it's so much different when you have someone that you really love and you're really like in a sacred union with. And also, I think that naturally we're all very kinky beings. And so, like, the amount of safety that you can have with someone allows for that safety to bring more out of you. And as you bring more out of you, what do you realize? That you are the totality and wholeness of everything that is, aka what you were talking about with the union with Creator. So at the end of the day, like, there's so many levels to it, and it's so fucking fun. But most people, especially men fall into this. I don't know about women. You can speak on the women half, but men, we get trained from an early age, like, oh, sex is just a release, and you can get it through porn or whatever, and like the whole working to is just the release. But the release.
Oh God, yeah, the ejaculation.
Yeah.
It's
so
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think pornography is what taught us that. To do it like a jackhammer, and it doesn't really teach men on how to actually touch a woman and take it slow. And it's a dark brainwash that's happening on the planet with that. And the kids getting access to it a lot quicker now with their phones. And of course it's free because it's siphoning your sexual energy. That's the most powerful energy on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's disconnecting us from our own power, it's ruining intimacy. Because then when I've had a lot of guys that they need pornography in order to stay erect, and it's just it's not their fault. It's part of the programming and the hypersexuality, and unfortunately, with VR and then the pornography on there, oh my God. People aren't going to need each other anymore. We're not going to need each other. And that's where it's heading. And with the robots.
I was going to say with the robots, like, good Lord, like, that's like, I don't know what's going to happen to society when those things start getting released, but yikes, And, like you were saying, like, what it's really doing is it's allowing people to forget how to connect with themselves and how to actually, like, from a man's perspective, like, to open a woman up in a way that feels safe. That's what a lot of men have no idea on how to do, because they've just looked at sex transactionally. Like, oh, this is something we do until I ejaculate and then we're done. And it's like, dude, there is so much more than that. That's like thinking Skittles is what healthy food's all about. It's like so far from what it really is that it's actually hilarious. And again, like, I was brought up in that generation too. And I'm so grateful that I was able to see through it a lot with psychedelics help, because I always knew from a young kid that I wanted, like, romantic love, And so, of course, like, we're sexual beings, like, like, I have a sex appetite, but at the same time, like, I always knew, like, porn doesn't do for me what I know that I want done through romantic love. And again, like, I've talked to Rachel about this. I don't know if every woman's the same, but for men, when you ejaculate, you're going to realize real quick if you're in integrity or not, like, before you ejaculate, whatever is good, just do it, man. Like, it's almost like an addiction. But the second you ejaculate, you'll know as a man, like, oh my God, you'll either feel shame or you'll feel like, wow, like, that was a beautiful connection there, And so, like, that's the thing for me that was always my governor, of like, ooh, no, I'm not doing that again. Or like, ooh, that I liked a lot. Like, that was really fun. So again, like, I don't know how a lot of men deal with that. I've talked to a lot of men. It seems like everyone has that, kind of like come down after. But it's very interesting, It
can take a long time to release that shame that comes from the ejaculation. And that's another reason why I teach men about semen retention and separating ejaculation from orgasm, because they're very distinct. And ejaculation is just having that local release. That it's great, but that's all you know until you learn about withholding that life force energy, which is your semen, because your body is trying to make the best of the best to create life, right? And so we're not meant to procreate all the time. And so if we can add intentionality into our sex rituals or even just foreplay or intimacy, because that's what Tantra is. It's adding intention and doing everything very consciously. And if you want to put your wishes in there, well, the better. And especially if two partners co-create the same thing, then you're adding that much fucking rocket fuel into the manifestation process, because the law of attraction helps with the speed of with sexual energy. The sexual energy is actually the thing that accelerates the law of attraction. And then with semen retention, going to the point where you're edging yourself, whether it's in masturbation or in intercourse, and then just stopping before that, the point of no return, because over time, what can happen in a very quick amount of time, you can become multi-orgasmic, and that is way pleasurable than the local ejaculation. And that could be very psychedelic and very euphoric, just like having ecstasy.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really good way to compare it. It is very similar to MDMA. And, I won't bring in another medicine into this, but MDMA and Tantra together, holy cow, with cannabis, like, oh my goodness. Rachel and I have had a lot of fun with that. But, again, like all these things are meant to reveal you to yourself, right? Whether we're talking about plant medicine, Tantra, etc. If we are all one mind here, right, like kind of expressing as the illusion of 8 billion different minds, then it makes sense why when we connect with another person, especially intimately, and we take our armor off and we allow them to see us totally and fully and in our holistic viewpoint, it allows us to know ourselves more, because the eyes we're looking into are also our eyes and vice versa. And so at the end of the day, like, you want to reach oneness and you have two minds working towards it instead of one. Oh my God, you just sped up your time times 2, it's amazing.
Yes. And to tie it back in with cannabis, when I started doing my cannabis ceremonies, I noticed that they were very orgasmic. And it was because I was also adding a lot of sound with the breath work. And inadvertently, I was doing tantric breathing. And then I had a lot of people telling me that they felt the Kundalini activations and that they were feeling orgasmic, many people. And so I was like, what is going on here? And that's when I started taking it seriously. And cannabis is actually the catalyst that got me to come out of the tantric closet and go finally get professional training done, so that way I could teach others in a safe way. And cannabis and Tantra go, like you said, hand in hand, because cannabis also awakens our senses, all of our senses, including the sixth sense, our third eye. And it's an expansion of consciousness. It's an expansion of energy in our body. It makes us more susceptible to feel all the levels of pleasure that there are. And and so I use cannabis and Tantra in everything that I do. And so my method is high Tantra. And so I use it in my tantric body work, which is a somatic therapy. I use it in my workshops, the Tantra ceremonies. I've been working a lot with couples. And so I'm teaching everybody about this. And I'm not saying like you need to smoke cannabis in order to practice Tantra. No, I'm just showing you a way. And I'm showing you a way that could lead for you having a huge awakening on your spiritual path.
100%. I mean, it's amazing. When I had my Kundalini awakening in Vegas, it was as a result of hitting
in Vegas.
Yeah, it was in a strip club in Vegas.
Whoa, what?
I just talked about this on the last episode too. So sorry, listeners, you're going to hear it twice. But you want to hear God having a sense of humor. If God had a sense of humor, it would make awakenings happen in places like a fucking strip club. So now I have to fucking talk about it, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, this kid's a fucking goofball." But it literally happened that way. Like, I was in a strip club with Rachel. We had taken some MDMA way earlier in the night, and we stepped outside and ripped a joint. And when I walked in, my whole life changed. And it wasn't something like as it happened, I could feel a feeling. Like, I could definitely feel a feeling, but I didn't know. Like, I just kind of wrote it off, like whatever. But then it started increasing and increasing and increasing and increasing over the next 14 days, to a point where I was like, I can't even open my mouth without either wanting to laugh or cry or just freak out. Like, I couldn't listen to music without crying or freaking out. Like, it was just so much goodness that it was like, oh, I feel like I'm going to explode, And that all happened as a result of hitting cannabis,
So, I mean,
yes, because cannabis brings us to our heart as well. And with the MDMA,
my goodness, it definitely worked. It 100% worked. And
so where were you? Were you sitting down when it happened? Were you at a booth?
so what had happened was Rachel and I decided to take some MDMA and go to a strip club because we went out to a cannabis convention, and it was just a bunch of not people we resonated with. And we had gone out there to find our own investors, start our own dispensary. We didn't really want to do that, but that's what we thought we wanted to do. So we went out there with a lot of expectations. And what happened was, the last night I was kind of seeing like, we're not really going to get our expectation met out here. Like, we didn't really meet anyone that we vibe with. Like, do we even want to open a dispensary? Like, dark night of the soul type stuff. So I asked her.
It's very unconscious, the industry, unfortunately.
Oh, it's brutal, and especially at MJ BizCon. Like, again, I'm sure there's cool people that go there, but it was just like so many people like, how much money can you make me? And like suit and tie types. So I'm like, dude, I've avoided you people my whole life. Like, fuck off. I don't want you in my cannabis world. So basically the last night I had asked her, like, what do you want to do? Like, it's our last time here. And she was like, do you want to take Molly and go to a strip club? And I was like, best girlfriend ever award. Cause I been to a strip club. She'd never been to one. So I was like, this would be cool. We'll do it together. So we go to a strip club, the Palomino Club in Vegas, and we just have a blast. We walk in there, we're rolling balls, and like we start talking to the strippers, and they can tell right off the bat, like, you guys are different, because I'm like, so what's your life plan? Like, like, how long you been working here? And they're like, you're not even looking at us being negative. And I'm like, nah, like, I'm just having fun, like, So they ended up hanging out with us, and we just had a great time. And I was tasked with keeping track of time and making sure we left at 4:30. Well, I went, 4:30 in the morning. So I looked at my phone at one point, and I'm like, shit, it's 7:30 a.m. And they were like, close. I saw people moving around, and it was dark in there. So I was like, oh, shit. So we had smoked a joint, like, probably like 10 minutes before or something like that in a back room. And so basically what happened was, once I realized that, I was like, fuck, Rachel really wanted to be out by 4:30. She was working on this big project for like a consulting gig she had taken on. Really boring. Writing out an application for an Illinois dispensary, like boring fest. And so she'd asked me like, hey, we have a plane ride the next day. Can we get home early? Yada, yada. So I had completely foobarred it. And so in the moment when she got upset, not even at me, but just like, fuck, how am I going to do this thing? Like, I need it done, like this deadline. In that moment, I had just been like, yeah, I fucked this up. And in that moment, it didn't feel like something was going to change the trajectory of my life. But what happened that I realized now that I didn't realize then was that I had been avoiding taking ownership in a lot of areas of my life. And that was the first time in a long time that I was like, this was me. Hi, it's me. I'm the problem, right? Like, this is me. And she wasn't even like that upset with me. But it was just something that I've been like, no, I'm okay with taking accountability over this. And when I did that, it gave me some of my power back. And once that happened, the next day on the plane, my soul started showing me like, all right, you're growing up here. Now I can show you more of how you've given your power away. And one of the main ways was unconsciously using cannabis, right? These kind of things. So that's how that all happened. It was really fascinating, And now I get to tell the story about fucking having this happen at the strip club every time, So it's just.
But like, what I want to know is when you got awakened, like at the strip club.
Yeah. So basically what happened was when that happened, I had a very interesting feeling come over me that I didn't know how to place. Because again, like my logical brain is like, well, we took Molly earlier. Like, could it be that? But what started happening was I felt at like right above like where my crotch area is on both sides of my body, right, front and back, I started to feel this very warm feeling happen. And for a second, I was like, am I peeing myself? Because like, sometimes you got to check when you're on drugs. So I was like, am I peeing myself right now? And I checked and I'm like, I'm not. So then it felt like almost like a tickling type feeling. Like I was getting tickled, but not like hard, not like, stop, but like just a little bit like, whoa, that kind of feels good. And so like, at the moment, we're about to get the cab ride to go home. We get the cab ride. I'm still feeling that feeling. It's not really increasing or whatever. We get back to the hotel like, I don't know, probably like 8:30 a.m. or whatever. We pass out, and the next day we had a flight at 1. So I slept for like 2 hours. We get up, we get our shit together, and we get on the plane. On the plane, that's where I start getting a lot more of the ideas. And I had a migraine at that point too, but I wasn't bothering me. Like, I don't know why. Like, I felt the pain. It's not like I was impervious to pain, but it was like, there was something else that was like, don't worry. It's almost like if you have homework, but the weekend's about to happen. So you're like, I got this thing, but that thing's really cool, So it was kind of like that feeling. And then what really happened, the next level up was, it was probably about 2 days later, every Tuesday for like 3 years, I went and got a myofascial release massage. And I would drive 45 minutes from the dispensary down to Plymouth, which is like 40 minutes from the dispensary, to go get this massage. So I was driving down and I had this awareness that I wanted to put on A Day to Remember, which is like a band that I used to listen to when I was a teenager. So I put it on and I start belting lyrics out. And as I start belting lyrics out, whoosh, this whole feeling starts. And I just knew it as like, oh my God, this feels amazing. So I thought maybe I'm activating something with my vocal tone. Like I didn't know as much as I know now about spirituality when that happened. I started feeling that feeling, and I just, I was like, oh, this is a really good feeling. And then it just kept getting stronger and stronger to the point where then I couldn't even listen to music. That's when I started making posts on Facebook. I didn't even have Instagram then. That's when I first tagged Mark England, who I just heard on the podcast. He reached out to me, was like, you should get in my program. I got in and lifted because of that. That was when all that shit happened, was during that period. It lasted for like, I don't know, 14 to 16 days of like just pure amazement. And when I talked to Aaron about it, because Aaron like specializes in Kundalini, he was talking about the same thing. And one thing he brought up that I had forgotten I had even experienced was the concept of like fire veins. Like, he's like, dude, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and it would feel like my veins were like not on fire, but like kind of on fire. And I have to like walk around and like shake it out of my body. And I remember during that time, I had this feeling of like, wow, there's a lot of energy coursing through me. I felt like I was plugged in an electrical socket. So I was like shaking a lot during that time. And I never connected that until I met Aaron, and he was like, no, that's a sign of Kundalini. And that's when I was like, oh, I guess that was a Kundalini awakening. I didn't know what to call it.
No, I think it's more your Kundalini is waking up.
Yeah.
And it's activating, and you're experiencing all the symptoms, which aren't always pleasant.
Yeah.
But you're on the process. You're on the path.
So fascinating, though, like, because I had
and
heard
you have the huge like phenomenon that happens when you are filled with the waves of orgasm.
So I had, let me think, like, I mean, I definitely had moments where, like, when I'm on mushrooms, for instance, right? This happens a lot of mushrooms where I'll just shake like crazy, right? So when that happened, right, I wasn't on mushrooms or anything. I was sober, like, because when I got home, I went full sobriety. Like, that's why I knew nothing else was affecting it. That was the first time I had gone full sober, like nothing, like no caffeine, no kratom, no cannabis, no nothing. So there were times where I'd be sitting in my chair, just vibrating, feeling so good, and feeling like I wanted to explode and just wanted to go tell the world I loved them and like all these things. I remember I made this post. I'd always hated winter. And I remember I made this post and this whole Canva graphic of like me laying in the snow, like, guys, it's beautiful outside. Like, I've always thought snow was terrible, but it's actually beautiful. Like, all that kind of stuff was happening. And I just didn't know what to do with all the energy in me. I was like, I want to go hug everyone. I want to like tell everyone I love them. I want to like do everything I've ever loved. I want to travel to every place, but like everything everywhere all at once, like that kind of theme. That's what it was like. It was very confusing, but I didn't really care because it was a great feeling. So it's like, whatever, I'll roll with it. But yeah, it was fascinating.
Yeah. The Kundalini awakening process will dismantle your life and like completely shake everything up, but for your highest good.
Yeah. It was fun. Like, it was definitely uncomfortable. Like, I was obviously quitting cannabis. I didn't know what was going to happen to my whole career at that point. The pandemic happened right after that. I didn't know what the fuck was going on there right off the bat. So there were a lot of like stressful things happening, but I was like, this is all working in my favor. Like, I just had that deep belief. So it didn't make any of the other stuff as uncomfortable,
Yeah. Right.
So cool. Oh, I'm glad I got to tell that story, especially with someone who practices Tantra, it's so cool.
Yeah. And I mean, these master plants and plant medicines, they can help trigger these Kundalini awakenings, which is fucking beautiful.
It really is.
Because they're really showing us the way.
Yeah.
And connecting us to the divine. What was it?
I said it's so fascinating, because I never learned cannabis or MDMA or any medicine could do that. Like, I didn't even know what fucking name to put on that until like a year ago when I met Aaron, and then we went through all the events, and he was like, that all checks out to be Kundalini. I was like, I just thought I had an epiphany. I didn't know what to call it, So really amazing. I have no idea, but it's amazing now because I imagine someone listening to this show has either experienced this before and now has a name to put to it, since you helped me kind of like work through that event and kind of lay it all out. Or if they have one in the future, they're going to be like, oh my God, I remember Zipporah and Ryan talking about that. I might be going through Kundalini awakening,
Yeah. And all those vibrations that you were feeling, that's actually the body getting rid of trauma and tension and stress automatically on its own, spontaneously.
Definitely. And I had kind of gotten that. I had my first big mushroom trip. I started vibrating a lot, and I just intuitively knew this isn't an issue. Like it wasn't exactly comfortable, but it wasn't uncomfortable either. I was just like, man, this is like really hilarious. Like, I'm like fucking basically like humping the air over here because I'm shaking so loud or so heavy. And my friends were kind of like, what the hell are you going through over there? But other than that, I just knew intuitively, like,
That's okay. And so every time it happens to me, like anytime I take LSD, it's like nonstop for 10 hours. I'm just shaking, you know?
Yes. And it's more than okay because it's like making love with the universe cosmically.
Yeah.
And if you look at it that way, you know, yes. And if you look at TRE, trauma tension release exercises, that's essentially what they're trying to get people to do.
Yep.
And by working their muscles to the point of exhaustion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or close to that. But with Kundalini, we're allowing, and that's why it's a process of deep surrender. We're allowing it to flow through us, and we start getting activated in all different ways, especially our sexuality.
Oh, it's amazing. Zipporah, this has been incredible. I can't wait to have you back on. I just looked down. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even realize we went through an hour already. Well, I guess I realized when Samson hopped on real quick. Shout out to the water shaman. He gave her an appearance. But Zipporah, I want to make sure I give you ample opportunity to share with people where they can find you. You have a new course coming out, which I'm going to link the video in the show notes for the intro video for everyone to check out. So if people want to check that out, they can. But where can people find you, connect with you, and dive into your world? Because all this stuff is just the beginning of what Zipporah does. I mean, with this, so many other topics we didn't even cover yet. But where can people find you?
HighTantra.com. On Instagram, I'm at Zipporah, the High Priestess.
Yes.
And I'm coming out with my new first course on tantric sexual mastery for couples. So that way you can learn how to have the gourmet sex that I was talking about on the show, and just to experience bliss and to watch it with your partner so you can learn all these tantric rituals and practices that are very practical and start right away at home. and also the course comes with wellness supplements inspired by nature and mushrooms, and they're libido enhancers. So that's going to accompany the course. So that way you have the physiological effects as well. And so, we'll link that in the show notes. I'm going to have a free mini course for your viewers so you can get started. Please reach out to me. Thank you so much, Ryan, Coach, for having me on here.
So pumped. And I got one last question for you, too, that I ask everyone that comes on the show, right? So we got to do it, right? We got to keep the ritual going. So let's say someone listens to this episode and they're interested in checking out cannabis and other psychedelics in their own life. What is the one piece of advice you could offer them to allow them to use the proper discernment in figuring out if psychedelics and cannabis are right for them right now in their lives?
With psychedelics, with other master plants, if it doesn't work for you, okay, it's not your medicine at this moment. Keep going. Keep finding the medicine, the ancestral plant, whatever it is. Keep experimenting. I always say just experiment, try it in a safe place with a safe guide, and use discernment about who you work with, please, because that could re-traumatize you. And then find something that really works. For me, it was cannabis, and for a lot of people, it's cannabis, especially for the people that have tried ayahuasca and they didn't have those third eye visions like they really wanted to. Cannabis is such a beautiful medicine that will open that up for you, and it's very feminine, heart opening, very introductory, like we said, very accessible, and you get to learn tools on how to up level your spiritual game and teach others, like bring others into your practice, your conscious cannabis rituals of breathing or just journeying with music, with high frequency tunes. And so and you can keep your sense of agency and get out of it. And it's not like a full 8-hour trip like it has to be with other medicines. And you can even do it microdosed and you'll still get very powerful effects. And so,
I love that. Oh, very sound and sage advice. And everybody, please go tap into Zipporah's world. It is amazing what she's doing. And I'm telling you guys, you got to check out a High Tantra ceremony when she does one live. They are incredible. Check out the course. She's definitely going to be back on for round 2, 3, and beyond. And if you love the show, I'd love a 5-star review. It helps us get the show out to more and more people just like you, which I am eternally grateful for. And wherever you guys are in the world, I hope you are all having the best day of your entire life. And until next time, may the source be with you to infinity and beyond. Peace for now.
Peace.
Peace.